Hey BookTube, this is my weekly wrap-up for March 16th to the 22nd.
I got my ticket for the long way round. 2 bottle whiskey for the way.
I read 5 books this week. 3 of them wrapped up a series. One was the second book in the series, and the last one was kind of a standalone, although there is a novella, and there probably will be companion books that go along with it. The one I think I loved the best was Ruins by Dan Wells. This is narrated on audio by Julia Whalen, and I did listen to it on audio. I have been waiting for this book for like a year because this is one of my favorite series of all time. It is exceptional. It's written so well. It's fascinating. It's an incredible look at the strategy of war and racism and personal bias and the building of a peace and not just surviving but reasons for survival. It's post-apocalyptic, somewhat dystopian in that there's a small contingent of humans that live on Long Island, and then there's another group of people called partials. They're 98% human, and they live kind of in Manhattan, and the two are at war. And there's a big long reason why, and when I do a review on this series I'll explain all that. But suffice it to say that this book was incredible. It was the perfect end to the series. All the loose ends were wrapped up in a fantastic way, and I just loved it. I can't say enough good things about it. You should read it. Read the whole series. The first book is Partials, the second book is Fragments. There's a novella called Isolation, which really goes into depth about one of the characters, a fascinating character, maybe the most interesting character in the book, and then Ruins. So 5 stars, easily 5 stars. I would give it 100 stars if I could. The second series I finished up was the Angel series by L.A. Weatherly. On audio, this is narrated by Cassandra Campbell, and I really kind of liked the series. I would give it about 3.75 stars rounded up to 4. It's a good, entertaining series about angels. The angels in this book, it's kind of a dystopian society where angels have come and they appear to humans, and humans are just dazzled by them and pretty much worship them. There's actually a church of angels that started in the book. But the angels kind of feed off the energy and the aura of the humans, and so it's a very bad result for the humans ultimately because it weakens them and makes them susceptible to all kinds of illness and debilitating conditions that eventually kill them. The main character is Willow Fields. She is half angel, and then the other main character is Alex Kylar, and he's an angel killer. And so we kind of follow their journey to eliminate all the angels. There's a big bad guy, and of course he wants to take over the world. The whole thing is pretty predictable. There are a few twists and turns along the way, but there's a love triangle that annoyed me to no end. And there was a lot of waffling around. And you know, I think the thing that bugged me the most about this series was the fact that these characters would see some big, you know, world-changing event happen, and then they'd take personal responsibility and, oh, it's all my fault. And really? No. The final book wrapped everything up pretty nicely. So, you know, as series go, this was very entertaining, and I would say if you like books about angels, you might enjoy this. The next book I read to wrap up a series was an ARC that I received from NetGalley, and that was for The Forever Song by Julie Kagawa. On audio, the first 2 books have been narrated by Therese Plummer, and I would assume that when this comes out in late April, it will also be narrated by her. I read it as an ebook. I loved this book. I loved this book, and what a relief, because it seems like so many of the third book in the series lately have been kind of disappointing. So this book is all about Allie, the reluctant vampire, and her real journey to figure out who she really is and to reconcile the fact that she hates vampires and she wishes she were human, but she had to become a vampire to survive. And so how she reconciles the two things and goes from living with a human community to living with a vampire community to becoming a mentor to kind of a new vampire. It's just a fascinating study in a person's discovering who they really are and if they are what they want to be. There is some comic relief that's introduced in the second book, and this continues through the third book. I'll tell you, some of these scenes had me laughing out loud. And this is not a laugh out loud funny book. It's just these specific scenes. Allison has a blood brother, and they bicker constantly. And there's one scene where they're in a car, and the father vampire is driving. And it's so funny because you can just hear him thinking, if I have to pull this car over. It was so funny. Now, the rest of the moments in the book are pretty gory, bloody, filled with the bad guy, who is a sadistic, psychotic vampire that leaves a senseless, bloody massacre in his wake. And it's basically their journey to find him, catch him, and kill him. And that proves to be very difficult. Along the way, there's a whole lot of character development that happens, and it's just, the book never slows down. I mean, the pacing is so good because you go from event to event to event. So although they're on a journey, there's really no slow moment in the book. Like I say, it concluded beautifully. All the loose ends were wrapped up. I don't like vampire books, but I loved this series, and I would highly recommend it. 5 stars. The next book I read was The Evolution of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. This was narrated on audio by Christy Romano, and it is the second book in the Mara Dyer series. The first book is The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer, and then the third book, which is called The Retribution of Mara Dyer, is due out in November. This series, if I had to describe it in a word, I would call it unpredictable. It's so good, and yet it has all these elements that if you put them together in another book, it would be a complete disaster. This follows the story of Mara Dyer, our main character, who in the first book, a building falls on her and 3 of her friends, and they're killed, but she wakes up in the hospital and she can't remember any of it. She lives outside Boston, so due to the PTSD and hallucinations that result from this trauma that's happened to her, they move to Miami, where she starts a new school and basically a new life. But the effects of what has happened to her, the trauma, kind of continue. And then they kind of bloom into this crazy, weird, strange thing. You never know what is going on. You seriously never know what's going on. And neither do the characters. So you never really get ahead of them. And man, this thing bounces from, basic trauma to reincarnation, to ghosts, to voodoo, to insanity and questioning reality, to superhero powers. It is all over the place. And then kind of underlying the whole thing, you have this beautiful little romance going on. And it's really wonderful because you can see that the romance is on a solid foundation, but it's almost like they're standing on a piece of glass that you can see through, because it's like that they're solid, but you can't really see what they're solid on. So how does she do that? That is fascinating. It's like the plot is outlined, but it's outlined in watercolor because the edges are all kind of really blurry. Like I say, in any other book, it would be a total disaster. But the way Michelle Hodkin writes this thing is flat out amazing. If you haven't read this series because you think it's too creepy, scary, weird, listen, I'm a huge chicken and I loved it. I was never so scared that I thought, I can't read this. It's just bizarre. It's just bizarre, but in such a fabulous, entertaining way. So I would highly recommend it. Now, I would not recommend this on audio. Christy Romano is able to capture the dry, biting wit that Mara has, but the rest of the narration was very flat, and it sounded kind of like, a high school English class where somebody stands up to read, and it's just statement after statement after statement. So I read the first book in print. I listened to the narration for much of the second book, but then I switched over to print again. I really just wanted to hear Noah's British accent, but it wasn't worth it. The character voices in my head were much better than what I listened to on audio. So 5 stars. This book, and sheer bizarre weirdness alone is why I gave it 5 stars. It's just crazy, and I highly recommend this series. The last book I read was called On the Island by Tracey Greaves, and it is narrated on audio by Heidi Baker. Now, the reason I read this was because Beatrice over at BooksOverLooks did a review on it, and it was a really great review. It made it sound really fascinating, so I thought, oh, I'd like to read that. Now, I read it as an ebook because Heidi Baker was so awful. I mean, there was no distinction between the voices, and she has kind of a high-up voice, and everybody sounded like that, and it was terrible. But in print, it was pretty good. I was really kind of pleasantly surprised. The whole idea here with this book is that there's a boy named TJ Callahan, and he's had cancer. He's missed most of his sophomore year of high school, so his parents are very wealthy, and they decide that he should spend the summer in the Maldives, and they've hired a tutor to kind of catch him up with his schoolwork so that he doesn't have to repeat his sophomore year. So the tutor that they hire is Anna Emerson, and she is 30. He's like a month shy of his 17th birthday. And in the course of getting to the island where his parents are, Anna and TJ end up in a plane crash, which maroons them on an island that is uninhabited. And they keep waiting for rescue to come, and it doesn't. And so as time progresses, they have to deal with the fact that they're surviving on this island, but can they keep surviving? And how long is it going to be until rescue comes? Is it ever going to come? So since TJ has dealt with the survival of this cancer he had, I mean, he's no stranger to survival. Anna, however, is. And there's this huge age difference. So it becomes the exploration of how they survive. And, it was realistic on many, many levels. Now, there were a couple of things that happened that I thought, a little bit of a stretch. But overall, I would say it was really believable. Part of what made it believable was the way that their relationship progressed. And I have to give kudos to this author because she didn't really make it this wonderful, happy, feel-good story. She made it had some bumps, and I really appreciated that. It ended on a high note, which was really great, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. If you want to know more about it, I will leave a link to Beatrice's review in the description box. You know me, I never do a TBR, but I have all these books behind me that are just unread, and I thought, I really want to work through them. So because I usually have 3 books going at a time, an audiobook, an ebook, and then a book in print, I thought for my book in print, I think I want to try and pull something out of my TBR jar. So I'm going to do that. I will mix them up and then just pull one out. This is Ashes on the Water by Mary Lindsay. So there we go. This, I think, is a retelling of something by Edgar Allan Poe. It's based on his poem Annabel Lee, and it's got some mystery to it, so that should be interesting. So that was my week last week, and I'll be back on Friday with a Friday Reads, and then next Tuesday, I'm going to aim for Tuesday, I will be back with another weekly wrap-up. That's it for me for now. I will see you next time, and thank you so much for watching.
When I'm gone, you're gonna miss me.